We've mentioned a few times now how motion can improve your shots and make them more interesting and more engaging, but what if you only have still images? If your subject is maybe talking about growing up in the 70s, they probably don't have a lot of video of themselves back then, but they probably do have some photos. And nowadays with cell phones, anything that you're making a story about, someone took a photo and has it somewhere, right? So we're going to look at making images move. We'll look at it in Final Cut Pro, the software that I use, but mostly we'll be talking about the concept of making images move and how that works. That's pretty consistent in about any editing program. Just the specific buttons you press, those are going to change from program to program. We're going to look at this image, and we're going to zoom in on it and pan across it from the pinwheel to the family's faces. Just like when you're editing a clip and you choose an in point and an out point for a start and an end, you do the same to add motion. You tell the computer where you want to start, in our case that's on the pinwheel, and where you want to end, that's on the family's faces. Once you set those two things, well, then the computer will do all the work in between to make the move from the in point to the out point. So those in and out points, they're called keyframes. They're the frames that we have to show the computer what we want so it can then figure out how to make all the frames in between. If you need to look up on how to do this in your program, doing a search for your software plus setting video keyframes, that'll probably get you there. So I'm going to do a couple of things to begin. First, I'm going to make that opening frame, the one that zooms in on the pinwheel. I'll set my play point on the first frame of the photo on the timeline. I'll select the photo, and then I'll jump over here to zoom in on the photo. The zoom or scale is a percentage, so the higher the percentage, the more that I'm zoomed in. And that's probably about where I want it, and then I need to move the photo around to make it look good. I can adjust where the position of the photo is on screen by adjusting the X and the Y position. The X moves it left and right, and the Y moves it up or down, just like on a graph. What I'm looking for is, how do I make this look good? Remembering the rule of thirds, framing, anything that helps make this image look nice as I'm reframing it. Once I've got the opening frame looking like I want, well, now I have to tell Final Cut that this is a keyframe. That's this little diamond box here on the scale and another one here on the position. Once those are clicked on, well, that makes this a keyframe for the scale and for the position. Now if I hit play, nothing happens. The image just sits there, and that's because there's only one keyframe. For a keyframe to work, it needs a second keyframe that changes something. So let's move to the last frame of the photo on the timeline. Make sure that the clip is still selected and click the diamonds for scale and position to add the keyframe here. Now if I make adjustments, the program knows to move from the earlier position to this one. So I reposition and I zoom out a bit and play with it until I think the image looks good. Now if I go back to the beginning of the clip and hit play, there's my motion. I can retime the effect if I want, and I can open it up by right-clicking and selecting Show Video Animation, and there are my keyframes. I can move around any way I want to. Make it go faster, I just make less time between the two keyframes, or slower with more time. And that's basically it. You can apply these same ideas to about any image to add motion and just make it more visually interesting, or maybe create a reveal of something in the photo, or really any effect that you want. These effects are also available for video and for text, not just photos, by the way. You may have noticed that the finished version of the interviews with the child advocacy team look much better than the raw footage. Well, that's because the raw footage is filmed much more loosely, and I zoomed in and I repositioned the interviews for the finished version. And I also added color correction and some other effects that we'll talk about later. And just for fun, here's the raw video of me talking here without effects, and then with the effects turned back on. That's a little better, huh? One other trick. If your photo doesn't cover the entire screen, that happens a lot if you have a tall photo, and you're trying to make it fit on a screen like this, that may let the interview show through where the photo doesn't actually cover the full screen. There are a couple of options for that. One is to put a black or white or really any color background behind the photo to cover where the photo doesn't cover. You do that by adding a color screen on a track above the interview, but below the photo. Most programs will let you create a color background that you can use. In Final Cut, it's just called a shape. And you go into the properties of the shape to change the color. Then you can adjust the length of it on the timeline to match the length of your photo. Another thing that's a little more hip to do nowadays is to put the image behind itself but blurred, so the background becomes something that complements the image without taking attention away from it. To do that, you make a copy of the photo and you put it on a track below the photo, then select that copy that's on the lower track and zoom in on it until it fills the frame. Then add a blur effect. Your program might have more than one blur option. A Gaussian blur will usually look nice. Adjust the amount of the blur if it doesn't look good, and there you go. Now, you can still add keyframes to the unblurred photo to add any motion that you want, and the blurred version will keep a nice background behind it.